road. So guys, I've got a couple of minutes before I move on to you, and we've got to touch a little bit, and this is a rabbit hole. It can be a rabbit hole. It's the systems and management of the transactions, because now it goes from cutting one invoice for against the PO and getting paid to a settlement report, inventory management in multiple locations, because it's still your inventory at FBA. Just give us your quick overview of how to go about handling those things.
So the quick overview, often we have to, this is part of the process, we have to, coach brands through and sort of teach them how to manage, right? So, to boil it down to its most essential, right? It's understanding, so we'll use inventory as the first component you touched on, right? So now brands have to go, sometimes they may have direct selling experience and their own fulfillment experience in other places, in which case bolting on Amazon as an FBA selling component, right? Another source of inventory might not be that difficult. They might already be used to, for example, like, virtual inventory locations, right? So whereby they're carrying inventory on their balance sheet, it's just sitting somewhere else, and it's a transfer between two locations on their balance sheet handled within their ERP. Some brands might not have experience with that, right? And so we may have to get in and coach them on how to, set up their ERP to do so, right? We have experience working with many of those. We don't need to go into each one of those, but teaching a brand how to say, okay, look, you're not going to get a PO for this. Right. So now we sort of parlay to the transaction component of this, right? Which is that with some brands we'll work with, how do you gather an understanding of, the transactional component of, inventory selling on Amazon, meaning, as you sell a product, right, you've got to decrement that inventory by whatever amount of units you sold, and then understand what is the impact back to your channel P&L, right? So the sales and all the costs associated with the movement of that inventory. And so, again, that could be facilitated by an integration or a connection that marries Amazon transactions back into your ERP, right? And we'll help brands set those up. Again, it depends on the complexity of business, right? Many businesses may be small and rapidly scaling, in which case they're fairly flexible with their architecture. Some brands we work with are quite large. They might be, international, right? And have very entrenched and established processes whereby we have to help them marry Amazon data to an existing process. Sometimes we might get lucky, right? They might be, for example, Nick, like big Amazon sellers in other regions, right? Like UK, EU, they're coming to the US. They already have some experience with this, and it's just sort of, helping them get a handle on, for example, like US transactional data versus like what happens in Germany. So there's those components of tying it back to the ERP and the inventory management system. And look, there's usually a little bit of a learning curve with getting that to go. But the good news for most brands is that between integrations that are out these days that integrate with pretty much any ERP or financial system there, and inventory management software, that these are very easy things to facilitate. Right? Like we can help most brands handle this, and it's usually not too difficult. It takes a little bit of considered thinking up front, a little bit of planning, but it should not in any way for anybody be a deal breaker, right? Or a gating factor to making this decision.
Yeah, it starts with a little bit of education, and then knowing what questions to ask these brands to say, how do you handle this? What system of records are you using? Okay, here are the options, either something that ties into a system they're already using, or putting something else in place. Fortunately, there are a lot of, decent tools out there that accomplish a lot of this, just whether it's, inventory reconciliation and recognition, or accounting, and cash flow reconciliation, right? Those are, we're not trying to reinvent tools that exist that are purpose built for handling those types of things for that, whatever their requirements are.
There's helping brands understand this from a sales and marketing standpoint, right? Like I spent a certain amount of ad dollars, I got ad sales, right? And then there's going down to the nitty gritty transactional level stuff, right? Which is like, how does Amazon timestamp a transaction, right? Collected in Greenwich Mean Time, corrected to Pacific, then reported to, Amazon Seller Central Reports. You got to pull that out, and a brand might get all wrapped around the axle because they lost 500 transactions. You're like, no, you said they happened on Monday. They actually happened on Tuesday. Right.
Yeah.
Like the little stuff you go into those things, like you help brands to figure out. But again, these are like, sort of table stakes for making this change. And this day and age with, the integrations that are out there, usually pretty easy to get a handle on.
Yeah.
And we coach, we also, I think the last component of this is just coaching brands through how Amazon reconciles all these things, right? Like the 2-week settlement and payout cycle of time, how they correct for returns, right? A lot of brands have trouble accounting for these things because, for example, like Amazon's cash impact of returns hit your settlement statement when they happen, not in respect to an order, right? So everybody looks at January and goes, oh my God, my returns are crazy relative to December, right? Whereas sometimes we need to help brands look at this on an order corrected basis where we say, look, your return rate actually didn't change all that much from a cash basis. You're just seeing overflow from the fact that Amazon allows a 30-day return window, right, on an order, right? So those returns can lag quite a bit sometimes. Amazon is changing some of those policies, right? We see on the horizon that hopefully some of the return policies that have been so liberal in the past are going to be tightened up to help protect brands. But again, this is just part of that coaching component in terms of understanding everything. And then I think the other thing you mentioned was there's all those little hidden fees that you don't always expect as a brand, which is like service administration fees and refund administration fees. So again, just an exercise we go through in terms of a P&L, right? We build it out to help a channel a brand understand what the channel impacts are going to be.